Underscores, where we talk to the overlooked people in the world of gaming. Today's guest is Krithalith, who has a very unique story to tell. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, before we get into all of this, there's a big kind of key phrase we need to address. Could you please explain what a tool-assisted speedrun is?
Yeah, so a tool-assisted speedrun is basically, it's a speedrun made using tools. So the usual tools would be things like an emulator, which is something that allows you to play a video game on a computer and do things like make save states and advance the game one frame at a time and choose your inputs for every frame of the game. And then using those tools, you can try to figure out what the absolute optimal way is to do something in a game. And then usually, of course, the aim is to do something as quickly as possible. So, for example, collecting a star in some level in SM64. And then you really, you can spend an infinite amount of time trying to really get every frame out of a single time.
So, can you tell us the story of how you got involved in Super Mario 64 TASing, which is tool-assisted speedrunning for short, and how that led into the creation of Scattershot?
Yeah, so I got into SM64 pretty early because I had the console when I was a very young kid. I don't think I understood the game very well because I was like 4 years old, but I did remember the game, and in my teenage years I also played a lot of ROM hacks on emulator, which are basically just like, hacks of the game with new levels, and so you can keep playing the game in new ways, which are fun. Somewhere around 2017 or 2018, I came across something called the SM64 TASing competition, which is basically a group of people who try to compete by doing certain tasks in the game as fast as possible using TAS tools, basically. So the way that works is someone would come up with a task for something to do, like, okay, start in this level, collect 3 red coins, and then break this box, and then your time ends, something like that. And then everyone would work on that in secret without telling each other what they're doing or what strats they're doing. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, everything is revealed. Everyone reveals their run that they've made and the time that they were able to achieve. And then there is a reveal stream hosted by Ted, which is an awesome guy and a long-time speedrun community member. And then you get to see how well you did compared to other people. So there's a bit of a competitive element as well. And basically, I started watching the reveal streams. And at a certain point, I decided to give it a try myself. So I could, try actually TASing the game that I've been casually playing for many years. And I found it very interesting. So at first, I just started competing in these task competitions, and at first I didn't do very well, but over time I slowly learned more about the game and about the tasking tools, so I slowly got better.
And so how long was it until you actually created what you've got to be the most famous for recently, which is Scattershot?
Oh yeah, so that was the second part of the question. Let's see. So I started doing those TASing competitions around 2018. I've always been interested in like math and optimization, so I started looking at what might be possible in terms of like computerized or brute force optimization in the game around 2020. So I started looking at what are situations in the game where it would be useful to like check every possibility. So, for example, something like the Koopa race. There's 2 Koopa races in the game, and how quickly those races end is determined by how quickly Koopa can make it to the flagpole, and that is dependent on like a small set of variables like what angle Koopa has when you talk to him for the first time, what time Mario finishes the race in, and sometimes things like bowling ball spawners and Mario entering Koopa's range. So there's like a lot of possibilities, but it's somewhere, if you combine it all, it's somewhere in the millions of possibilities, and that makes it possible to like run through every single possibility on a computer one by one and see what the best one is or what the best combination of parameters is.
So
yes. Mm-hmm.
So this tool that you made, Scattershot, how does it do that? So like in concept, it's sort of given an objective and it brute forces it a ton of times to sort of learn and improve itself. How in the world is that even possible, especially when you're working in the confines of an outdated console?
Yeah, so I think I'll have to take a couple steps back. So, for example, what I was talking about with the Koopa stuff, that would be like just I don't know, like the most basic possible brute forcing. And one of the key things when you are brute forcing is how you manage to emulate the game. Because, of course, the game originally runs on N64 and it runs on one specific speed, which is 30 FPS. But if you want to do something like check every single Koopa angle, that's going to take you hours or days or even years. So then in an emulator, like Mupen, for example, you can do it a bit faster. You can maybe get like 1000 FPS. And maybe you can run several instances of Mupen, so then you can get a couple thousand FPS. But one of the key breakthroughs was the full decompilation of SM64, which allowed you to natively run the game directly on a modern computer CPU. So there's no longer an emulation layer in between, and that means that with the proper optimizations and like removing large parts of the code, you can actually run the game at like 10 million FPS, 20 million FPS, 50 million FPS. And that makes it so that you can do like much more complex types of brute forcing. So I spent a bunch of time working on annealing, which is basically just jittering the joystick to see if, just random jitters in the joystick could make something better. So that's still not Scattershot, but that was like the step after doing the simple Koopa stuff. And that basically allows you to like slightly optimize straining in air or slightly optimize flying trajectories or swimming trajectories. And people have made their own codes or their own programs that do similar things as well. And then only in 2023 did I actually start working on what became Scattershot. So my first goal for Scattershot was just to see if I could do things in the game with random inputs. So, yeah, roughly speaking, I wanted to see what would happen if you just did like semi-random button presses and joystick angle holds, and see if it would randomly collect a really simple star, like for example in the deep freeze. I don't know if you know that star.
I do.
Yeah, it's the very simple one for the viewers at home. It's this very simple one in Snowman's Land, where you kind of jump into the ice sculpture and the star is just right there in the open. So you jump into a hole in the ice sculpture and then you collect the star. It's like a 5-second star, and all you have to do is jump in a hole. So I thought, if there's any star that you could possibly get with like just random inputs, that would be it. And with some tweaking, I found a way to make random inputs that would, occasionally randomly grab that star. And I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. That's interesting. That was new at that point. And then I think occasionally it would even collect the bully star, like the ice bully star, where you just push him off the platform and then grab the star. But anything more complex than that was like really hard, because it had a hard time like getting through all parts of the level. And at a certain point, it becomes very unlikely that you're able to like make it across a gap or across like a tight walkway or something like that. And so the first thing I tried was basically creating a library of runs that had gotten to a certain point in the level. So you can imagine splitting the level into a whole bunch of like small cubes or large cubes. And then for each of those cubes, you can tell like, okay, have I been to this cube? And if so, how did I get there? Like with what sequence of inputs? And then instead of like going from the start of the level every time, you can now select one of the cubes you've already been to, take that input string, and then continue that input string randomly until you encounter new cubes. So it's kind of like a flood fill in Paint, if that makes sense.
Interesting. I kind of get that. Yeah. So like you can sort of see out of all the random things it's done, you can choose. Okay, this is more what I'm looking for. I want more of this and more things coming out of that general area.
Yeah. So in general, you just try to what I call explore the state space of the level. And so the state space could be something simple, like just trying to visit every cube of space in the level. But it could also be like try to visit every cube of space and with every Mario angle, or every cube of space with every Mario angle with every like speed and stuff like that. So you try to split all possible positions and states Mario could be in into like pretty coarse blocks. And then you try to see if those random inputs will put you in a position like that.
And how easy is it, how simple is it to instruct Scattershot to actually do these things?
Well, the algorithm itself is very simple. It's not actually that much code. It's basically just, you find a way to do random inputs in a way that's like semi-coherent in time. Because if you do completely random inputs like random button presses and jitter A and jitter B and jitter Z and a random joystick angle in every frame, then you're not really going to get anywhere, usually. You're just going to jitter around and not really get anywhere. So what it does is it once every so many frames, it'll try to like change the joystick angle or change a button from pressed to unpressed, etc. So then you get sequences that are like more similar to normal gameplay. And so what you do is you start in the level, you do a bunch of those like coherent random inputs, you look at all the possible states that Mario has gotten in, which is stuff like the angle and position and stuff like that. All possible states you have reached, and every time you reach a state or a position, you check, okay, have I been here before? If no, then okay, that means that is the first time I've made it to this position, so I've discovered something new. Okay, then you save that. Or, if I have been here before, did I manage to get here earlier than I did in the run that's allocated to that position? And if so, you replace it. So you build up a library where you have a run for every position in the level, basically. And then you keep selecting random existing positions in the level and extending those runs to see if you can get to new positions, if that makes sense.
That's, yeah, so I think I get it. It's like, again, you take what you want, tell it to do more of that, and then pick the best out of the ones that it gives you. And this has proven to be extremely powerful because it's broken like several task times, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, something being faster than tasks other than a new task is like a fairly just completely new concept, really. And it's also found the iconic now iconic cannonless setup and other big like real time saves, and it's just kind of wild like how this one tool has just been able to do so much of that stuff. So like, how much of that is actually you telling it to do something specific, and how much of it is just you sort of clicking a few buttons and leaving for like 10 hours and coming back and seeing what crazy things it's done.
Yeah, so I think you meant to say carpetless back there when you said cannonless.
Oh, yeah,
sure.
sorry. I
Just,
made that up.
I haven't made a cannonless setup yet. But, yeah, so running Scattershot is it's kind of tedious. It does a lot of stuff on its own, but it also needs a lot of guidance so that it doesn't spend like hours or days or weeks looking at things that are not useful. So you have to generally lock it down to things that are interesting or regions that are interesting. So one of the simplest things you can do is, for example, just say that it has to stay within a certain area. For example, if you're optimizing the deep freeze, it doesn't make sense for Mario to go like all the way to the other corner of the level. Like that would take an immense amount of like memory and time looking for runs that go there, which makes no sense if you're trying to optimize the deep freeze. And there's other stuff like that. Like you can select for speed on a certain frame. You can make sure the runs are like at most X seconds long. So you can really cut it down, and that's very important to be able to run Scattershot and make it like, fast enough that it can actually find, improvements and new stuff. So you want to cut down on the search space, which is going to depend on the star and what you're trying to do. And another thing is that often you'll be able to cut something into segments, which also helps a lot, because for a lot of stars, unless there's some completely new idea, you generally know, okay, I have to go here first and then go here and then go here. So I could try to do all of that in one go, but it's much more efficient to like split it up into little 2 to 3 second segments, which works much better for Scattershot. So it really depends on what you're doing, but it does need like a lot of babysitting for it to not be thinking endlessly about things that are not useful.
So, would you consider runs made by Scattershot to be another way to make a tool-assisted speedrun, or something separate entirely, as it's very much not the same as a traditional task?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it still requires a lot of babysitting. It still requires someone who understands the game to direct Scattershot, to make it search in a certain way or search certain areas. So the way I see it, it's just another tool in the tool-assisted speedrun toolbox, just like a memory viewer or an emulator or something like a simulated annealing tool or stuff like that. So it's just another tool, and it still requires quite a lot of like human effort to make good runs with it.
So the fact that Scattershot exists now and has been doing all this stuff kind of has pretty massive implications for the future of speedrunning and tasking, in my opinion. Do you think brute forcers and stuff like Scattershot will eventually become like a normal part of tasking in other speedrunning communities?
Yeah, so at least for SM64, I think there's still a lot that can be done with Scattershot. I've only recently started looking at using Scattershot for finding setups for hard tricks that used to be task only and now might have a somewhat reliable way to do it actually on controllers, stuff like carpetless, but also well, I found a whole bunch of other strats, but so far they've been limited to like single star and segment RTA strats, which is still better than nothing. Yeah, so for SM64 tasking and speedrunning, there's still a lot to be done. For other games, it can definitely be useful. But one of the things that makes SM64 special is that it's a relatively old game, and also it has been fully decompiled. Which means that the game has been pulled apart into its original code, basically. And that is very important because that means that you can run the game on a computer very, very fast, like way faster than on console or on a normal emulator. And that is kind of a requirement for making Scattershot actually useful, because it needs to be able to run the game very fast. So it's going to depend on the game whether or not like a decompilation exists, or whether it's an old enough game to like run really fast on a modern computer. But I could definitely see it being useful for all kinds of other games.
And, okay, one final question. Do you have some grand scheme or end goal in all of this, or are you just sort of going along and finding things as you do?
Yeah, basically just going along. I started tasking, and then I started doing the computer searches, and then I started working on Scattershot, and then I started working on Scattershot for like RTA tricks, and I'm not really sure where it's gonna go. I mean, one thing that would be really interesting for me to see is to see if it would at some point be possible to mathematically prove that some star in the game is optimal, but I think we're still quite a ways away from that. I do think that it is going to be possible for some very short stars in the future with new techniques. And another interesting thing would just be to see what new things Scattershot can find in SM64, and also if it can be used in other games as well.
All right, is that all, or is there anything you'd like to say?
I think that's pretty much what I like to say. I don't know if you have any more spur of the moment questions, maybe.
No.
All right.
Well, thank you so much, Krithalith, for being here on another episode of Underscores. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Sam Underscore. If you have questions, suggestions, or want to be on a future episode of Underscores, you can contact me at samandrews0808@outlook.com. Intro and outro, samples Slingshot by Krista Workson. You can listen to his music on Spotify or download it for free on Bandcamp. Thanks for listening.